the Pacific Ocean. It's the single largest feature on our planet. I mean, it covers almost a third of the globe.
It's impossibly big, unfathomably deep.
And according to the official story of human history, it was just empty. A complete void during the most critical years of early human civilization.
Exactly. We're taught a history that's all about isolation. You get this picture of primitive people in these tiny canoes battling impossible currents to settle these little specks of land.
And then there's the other pillar of the story, the Bering Strait.
Oh, yeah. A small group, we're told, with stone tools, crosses a frozen land bridge and then somehow populates 2 entire continents, building complex societies while being totally cut off from everyone else.
These 2 narratives, the Americas being settled in isolation and the much later Polynesian expansion, they're the absolute foundation of modern anthropology. The whole thing rests on ancient cultures being separate.
And that's where we're starting our deep dive today. Because what if that entire foundation is just wrong? What if the Pacific isn't an empty void but a giant submerged graveyard?
We are jumping into a stack of source material today that completely demolishes that foundation. We're looking at evidence for a lost land, a single global civilization that the ancients called Mu.
Our mission is to unpack the evidence that points away from coincidence and directly towards inheritance. The sources we've looked at suggest the incredible similarities you see across the ancient world aren't accidents, they're echoes.
Echoes of a single vast empire that rose, get this, 50,000 years ago.
And Mu wasn't just a civilization. According to these texts, it was the mother culture, the source.
So let's start unpacking the anomalies, the things the mainstream story just can't explain. Okay, so this core idea in our sources, the impossibility of isolation. If the mainstream story is true, if the Americas were totally cut off, the Pacific was a barrier, not a highway, how do you explain the things we see?
You can't. Not logically. I mean, if cultures are truly separate, they should look separate. They should have unique architecture, unique myths, unique science.
But they don't.
Not at all. They replicate these incredibly complex feats, especially in architecture, that just defy their supposed tech level. And the most obvious one, the one everyone knows, is the pyramid problem.
Right. You say pyramid, you think Egypt, Giza.
Instantly. But then you look across the Atlantic. You look at what the Maya and the Aztecs were building.
Thousands of miles away, an ocean away, and they're building these monumental stepped pyramids that are, for all intents and purposes, identical.
And it goes way beyond just, piling stones, which is the simple explanation you sometimes hear.
Oh, it's much more than that.
These structures were aligned with incredible astronomical precision. They weren't just pointed north, south, east, and west. They were tracking the exact same stars.
So it's a question of probability, right? How likely is it that 2 totally isolated cultures invent the exact same type of building?
And then use it to track the exact same constellations, like Orion and the Pleiades.
Mainstream archaeology just calls it a coincidence. Parallel development.
Which, when you see the scale of it, becomes a pretty unsatisfying answer. But it gets even more intense when you move out into the Pacific, into what would have been Mu's heartland. Let's talk about the megalithic sculptors.
We have to talk about Rapa Nui. Easter Island. Everyone agrees it's the most isolated, inhabited place on the entire planet.
And what did the people there do? They carved, moved, and erected almost 1,000 of these giant statues, the moai. Some of them weigh 80 tons.
80 tons. I mean, just think about that. That would challenge us today with our trains and our logistics.
It absolutely would. And then you jump halfway across the Pacific to the Andes in South America, the Tiwanaku civilization at Tiwanaku.
And what do you find?
You find figures that our sources describe as chillingly similar to the moai.
So it's not just the statues themselves, it's the technique.
Yeah.
How are these 2 groups, one on an island, the other at 13,000 feet, using the same impossible engineering to make the same unique statues?
That's the question the Mu hypothesis answers. The standard explanation for how they moved the moai, that they walked them with ropes.
While they were supposedly starving and cutting down their last trees.
Yeah. The sources say that theory insults intelligence. It's an explanation designed to protect the isolation theory, not to solve the engineering problem.
And these connections, these echoes, they're not just in stone. They're in symbols, in language, in their deepest myths.
Let's take the swastika. Before its, horrific modern meaning, it was a universal symbol of good fortune.
You find it everywhere. Ancient Greece, India, among the Hopi in Arizona, Japan.
A single complex symbol with a single meaning, cosmic order, good luck spread across the entire globe. That doesn't happen by accident. It suggests a common source, A proto-culture.
And the linguistic clues are even more specific. They're kind of mind-blowing.
Think about the sun god in ancient Egypt, Ra.
Ra. Right.
Now jump all the way across the world to the Pacific. Easter Island, other Polynesian islands. They're named for the sun or the creator god.
It was Ra.
Or Ra.
Exactly. That's not a coincidence. That points to a shared linguistic root, a mother tongue that was preserved in fragments across thousands of miles. But the real, I guess you could call it the smoking gun, is the myth of the civilizing gods. The sources call it the triple threat.
Because you find the same identical core story in three massive, supposedly separate civilizations, it's mathematically almost impossible for this to be independent invention.
Okay, so let's lay it out. First, Egypt.
They tell the story of Osiris, a god who comes from the sea, teaches them agriculture, gives them laws, civilizes them, and is then killed.
Okay, one. Now South America, the Incas.
They worshipped Viracocha, a white-skinned, bearded god who came out of Lake Titicaca, taught them architecture, and then sailed west across the Pacific, promising he'd return.
And finally, Mexico, the Aztecs.
Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, a god who came from the east, gave them the calendar and writing, and then sailed back east, also promising to return.
So, 3 different continents, 3 different cultures, the same exact story. A fair-skinned, bearded teacher arrives from the sea, gives them the keys to civilization, and leaves promising to come back.
At what point does coincidence become conspiracy? Or, in this case, a shared memory? These aren't separate myths. The sources argue they are fractured accounts of a single event, the arrival of survivors from lost sunken land.
That sunken land being Mu, the single source for all of it.
And to understand Mu, we have to look at the researchers who first broke this story, who risked their careers to bring it to light. So, if we're going to accept these anomalies as echoes of a lost civilization, we have to go to the texts, to the people who first translated them. And this wasn't just some fringe idea, especially back in the 19th century.
Right, which brings us to the first key figure in our sources, Augustus Plongeon.
A fascinating character. He was a 19th century archaeologist, but unlike his peers who were just, raiding tombs, he spent 12 years living with the Maya people. He learned their language, their customs.
He immersed himself completely.
And because of that, he was the first person to successfully translate a key Mayan text called the Toronto Codex. And what he found was explosive.
So explosive that the academic world just buried it.
Absolutely. The Codex described a massive cataclysm, the sinking of a vast landmass. And it didn't just describe it, it named the survivors.
And crucially, it said where they went.
Exactly. It said the survivors sailed east from this sunken land, across the Atlantic, and founded the Egyptian civilization.
So Le Plongeon was arguing that the Maya weren't some primitive offshoot. They were the descendants of this much older, greater civilization, and Egypt was their colony.
You can see why that didn't go over well with the establishment at the time. It completely upended their timeline, so his work was rejected, suppressed.
But he wasn't alone, even if he didn't know it. Decades later, on the other side of the planet, in India, a British colonel finds the other half of the story.
James Churchward. His story is just incredible. He's stationed in India, and he befriends a high-ranking priest, a rishi, at a remote monastery.
And this priest basically holds the keys to the kingdom.
To a library of secrets. After building trust for years, the rishi reveals the monastery's greatest treasure, a hidden collection of ancient clay tablets.
The Naacal tablet.
The Naacal tablets, written in a language so old that only the highest order of the priesthood knew how to read it.
And the rishi teaches Churchward this language.
Yes, over a period of years. And the tablets told the story of Mu, the motherland, a vast empire that our sources say rose 50,000 years ago.
And the scale of it is just hard to comprehend. Larger than Australia, apparently, covering most of the Pacific.
It was the global center, the source of a universal religion's sun worship, a single creator, and the source of all science and government.
So all these similarities we see in Egypt, in Peru, they're not copies of each other. They're all copies of Mu.
They are direct inheritances. Egypt wasn't the dawn of civilization. It was a surviving colony. The Mayan pyramids weren't an invention. They were a faded memory of the grand architecture of the motherland.
And the civilizing gods, Osiris, Viracocha, Quetzalcoatl, they weren't different gods.
They were all titles for the same group of people. The Naacal priesthood, the missionaries of Mu, the scientists and teachers sent out from the motherland to establish colonies and enlighten the world.
This was the golden age that every ancient culture talks about, but it came to a violent, catastrophic end.
The tablets, the Mayan Codex, even Plato's story of Atlantis, they all converge on one event, Around 12,000 years ago, a global cataclysm. Maybe a comet, maybe a massive pole shift.
And in a single day and night, as the texts say, the homeland of Mu sank beneath the waves.
Wiped clean, 50,000 years of civilization gone. And all that was left were these scattered, traumatized colonies suddenly cut off from their source, beginning the long slide into what we call prehistory.
The great forgetting.
And of course, the academic world says this is a fantasy because there's no physical proof.
But the sources we're looking at argue that the proof is everywhere. It's just under 2 miles of water. Okay, so if we're following the sources, the big question is, where's the body? If a continent the size of Australia sank in the Pacific, it must have left some pretty big scars on the planet.
And that's the primary argument against it from mainstream geology. They say the Pacific floor is too young, too tectonically active, you've got the Ring of Fire. A continent can't just disappear there.
But the Mu hypothesis flips that argument completely on its head.
It does. It says that volatility, the Ring of Fire, that isn't proof against Mu. That is the evidence. It's the geological scar tissue from the event that destroyed it. The Ring of Fire is Mu's tombstone.
And sometimes tombs have things in them. The sources point to some incredible physical locations that just don't fit the official timeline. Let's start on the western edge of this supposed continent.
The Yonaguni Monument.
Discovered in 1986 off the coast of a small Japanese island. A diver just stumbled upon it.
And it is breathtaking. It's a massive monolithic structure, almost a mile long, 80 feet underwater. It has these huge terraced steps, sheer faces, and perfect 90-degree right angles.
Things that don't look natural.
At all. But of course, geologists rushed in and immediately declared it a natural formation. Just strange cracks from tectonic stress.
But one scientist didn't buy that.
Dr. Masaki Kimura, a marine geologist. He spent over 2 decades diving the site, mapping it, cataloging every feature that defied the natural explanation.
He found quite a bit.
He found what looked like drainage channels, post holes for columns, and clear tool marks that you just don't get from natural erosion. He concluded, after 20 years of study, that it is unequivocally man-made.
And the dating.
He dated it to at least 10,000 years ago, before the end of the last ice age. Built before history officially began. The sources claim this is a submerged coastal city from the western edge of Mu.
So if Yonaguni is the western edge, we have to go to the far eastern edge, back to Easter Island.
Right. And now we look at the Moai mystery in a new light. Why would a tiny, starving, isolated population spend all their energy on these giant statues?
The Mu hypothesis says they weren't isolated. Easter Island was never an island.
It was the sacred Eastern Plateau, one of the highest mountain peaks on the vast continent of Mu. The statues weren't built by a few struggling survivors. They were built by the masters of the motherland in their prime.
Which explains why they all look inward.
Exactly. They aren't looking out to sea for arriving ships. They are looking inward over the vast sunken empire that lies at their feet. They're eternal watchers. Memorials.
And there's one more secret on Easter Island, right? The script.
The Rongo script. A complex written language that has never been deciphered. It's completely unique in all of Polynesia.
But it's not unique in the world.
And this is the kicker. It bears a striking, if distant, similarity to the script of the Indus Valley civilization.
On the complete opposite side of the planet.
Another one of Mu's alleged colonies. The sources argue this is the smoking gun. Rongo and the Indus script aren't separate inventions. They are corrupted dialects of a single universal proto-script, the sacred language of Mu, carried across the globe by the Naacal priests.
We've laid out the echoes in stone, the physical evidence of a sunken land. But now we have to tackle the big one. How did they do it? How did these supposedly Bronze Age cultures build these impossible structures?
The answer, according to our sources, is lost technology, inherited science. And the best place to see the evidence for this is actually to look at Egypt again and what happened after the Great Pyramids were built.
Official history says things start simple and get more complex. But in Egypt, it's the other way around.
It's a complete inversion. The Great Pyramids of the Old Kingdom are the beginning, and they are the absolute peak of Egyptian engineering.
And everything built after them was worse?
Far worse. Smaller, cruder. Many of them just collapsed into rubble. They didn't learn how to build pyramids over time. They very clearly forgot how. It's a civilization that started at its zenith and declined.
A clear sign of inheriting something they no longer fully understood.
Their own legends talk about this. They call it Zep Tepi the first time, an age when gods walk the earth. The sources say these gods were the surviving Naacal priests.
And the Great Pyramid itself is the ultimate proof of this inheritance. Our sources are definitive. It was not a tomb.
All the evidence points away from it. Nobody ever found, no burial inscriptions, nothing. The air shafts aren't for air. They align perfectly to stars. It's described as a god machine, a library and a power plant built on the sacred blueprint of Mu.
And the precision is just. It's 21st century.
It's beyond. It's aligned to true north with an accuracy we could barely match until recently. And its geometry contains advanced mathematics.
You're talking about pi and the golden ratio.
Right. The base perimeter divided by twice the height equals pi. The ratio of its height to its slant height equals 5, the golden ratio. These are not numbers you stumble upon by accident.
This implies a deep, ancient understanding of mathematics and geodesy.
And then there's the signature, the Orion correlation. The 3 pyramids at Giza are a perfect map on the ground of the 3 stars in Orion's belt, as they appeared around 10,500 BCE.
A date that lines up perfectly with the supposed sinking of Mu.
It's the mark of a global master civilization, the signature of the motherland.
And while this was happening in Egypt, the same thing was unfolding in Central America with the Maya.
They also just appear, fully formed. Complex writing, massive cities, and this incredible obsession with measuring time.
Their calendar is more accurate than ours even today. They tracked Venus with 0 error. But the really impossible feat is their knowledge of the precession of the equinoxes.
That's the 26,000-year wobble of the Earth's axis. To measure that, you need thousands of years of continuous recorded observation from a fixed point. It's not something a jungle civilization invents.
They inherited it.
They inherited 50,000 years of astronomical data from the observatories of Mu.
So we have the math, the astronomy. But back to the central question.
Yeah.
How did they move the stones? The official story of slaves and ropes. It just feels inadequate.
It defies physics, especially when you look at a place like Pumapunku in Bolivia. They were carving diorite, one of the hardest stones on Earth, with surgical precision. The joints are so tight you can't fit a razor blade between them.
These don't look like hand-carved blocks.
They look like machine-tooled, mass-produced, interlocking components, like a kind of prehistoric Lego set designed to withstand earthquakes. This isn't craftsmanship, it's high technology.
And the sources say the technology was acoustic. The power of sound.
Cymatics, the idea that sound can manipulate physical reality. Ancient legends from Egypt talk about priests using a special rod to strike stones, making them weightless.
It sounds like pure fantasy.
Until you hear the story of Edward Leedskelnin, the man who built the Coral Castle in Florida all by himself. He moved 30-ton blocks of coral with no modern equipment.
And he said he'd rediscovered the secrets of the pyramids.
He had supposedly rediscovered the key to acoustic levitation, finding a stone's unique resonant frequency to neutralize its gravity.
But to do this on the scale of the pyramids, you need an incredible power source.
You'd need what Nikola Tesla was trying to tap into, Viril. Free, wireless, unlimited energy.
And this brings us back to the Great Pyramid's true function.
It's a massive piezoelectric power plant. It sits over an underground river, creating a current. Its granite chambers are full of quartz crystals, which generate electricity under pressure from the Earth's vibrations.
So it wasn't a tomb. It was a machine designed to generate and broadcast power wirelessly.
Powering the tools that built the cities, and maybe powering their vehicles.
The Vimanas?
The flying machines described in ancient Indian texts, another Mu colony. The Vedas describe them in incredible detail. Mercury vortex engines, vertical takeoff, incredible speed.
And there are depictions of these machines, aren't there, in Egypt?
The Temple of Seti I at Abydos. Carved on the walls, you can clearly see what looks like a helicopter, a submarine, and a glider.
Again, things that shouldn't be there.
They are fragmented memories of the lost technology of Mu. Proof that the pyramids weren't built by slaves with ropes, but by the survivors of a civilization that had mastered flight, free energy, and gravity itself.
So the sources paint this picture of a technological paradise, Mu, that was wiped out in a single day. But that wasn't the end of the catastrophes. That first event triggered millennia of instability.
A second filter, the Great Flood.
Right. The sinking of a continent would cause massive tectonic shifts, volcanoes, wild sea level changes.
The planet was wounded, and this led to the Great Flood that is remembered in every single culture on Earth. Noah, Gilgamesh, Manu in India. This was the event that put the water erosion on the Sphinx, dating it thousands of years before the pharaohs.
A global reset. And it nearly wiped out the struggling colonies that had survived the first cataclysm.
But not all of the inheritors of the knowledge, the Naacal priesthood, were lost.
The sources say the most elite priests saw this second wave coming.
And they retreated. They went to the highest, most stable places on Earth. the Tibetan Plateau, the Andes, the Ethiopian highlands, and from there, they watched the world drown.
And when the waters receded, they saw a new world, a savage world.
The survivors were traumatized, violent, fractured. And at this moment, these flame keepers, as the sources call them, made a world-altering decision.
They decided humanity wasn't ready for the power they held.
Exactly. They realized the technology that built the free energy, the acoustic levitation in the hands of this new traumatized humanity wouldn't be used to rebuild paradise. It would be used as a weapon.
It would lead to a final, self-inflicted apocalypse.
And so the Great Forgetting became the Great Hiding. The technology wasn't just lost, it was deliberately concealed.
Hidden away, preserved only in secret societies.
They founded the mystery schools, hiding the science and allegory in myth and ritual. This is the claimed lineage from the Egyptian priesthood to the Gnostics, the Templars, the Rosicrucians, the highest orders of Freemasonry.
They became the guardians, believing they were protecting humanity from itself.
And for thousands of years, they controlled the flow of information. They tolerated the rediscovery of what the sources call dirty, inefficient fire.
Oil, coal, combustion engines.
Because it was controllable. It requires fuel, pipelines, infrastructure, and most importantly, it requires a meter. It creates dependency. The keepers evolved into industrialists.
Until one man threatened to give the secret away for free.
Nikola Tesla. He wasn't inventing, he was remembering. His plan for a global network of towers broadcasting free, wireless energy, that was the power grid of Mu.
He was about to turn the power back on for the whole planet.
And the keepers, now financial titans, saw this as an existential threat. His main backer, J.P. Morgan, famously asked the question that sealed the fate of free energy.
Where will we put the meter?
And when Tesla said the energy was for everyone, his funding was cut, his lab was destroyed, his patents were seized. The Great Forgetting was enforced with a vengeance.
But the keepers weren't the only ones looking for this technology.
No. On the other side of the world, a different group was hunting for it, not to hide it, but to weaponize it. The Nazi SS.
The NRB division.
They believed they were the descendants of a rival ancient empire, maybe Atlantis, and that Mu's technology was their birthright. They sent expeditions to Tibet to find the nickel tablets, to find the blueprints for the Vimanas for their miracle weapons program.
So you have this secret war being fought in the shadows over lost technology.
And the Nazis' final desperate search focused on one place, Antarctica.
Based on old maps, like the Piri Reis map, that show it without ice.
Exactly. They claimed a huge chunk of it, New Swabia, believing it was either the location of the sunken homeland itself or a secret base left behind.
Which brings us to 1947, right after the war. Operation Highjump.
A full-scale U.S. military invasion of Antarctica. The official story was scientific research.
The reality, according to the sources, was a mission to hunt down a secret Nazi base.
And the commander, Admiral Byrd, came back horrified. He went on record warning of a new enemy that could fly from pole to pole at incredible speeds. Then he was silenced.
So what did he find down there? A Nazi base with Vimana tech.
Or maybe the ultimate prize. The central library of Mu, the Veritas Codex, preserved perfectly in the ice. We don't know. But the secret war for that technology and for control of our planet's energy continues.
So we're left with this world shaped by the keepers. A world of controlled energy, artificial scarcity. But the sources suggest their control is slipping. The dam is breaking.
The anomalies are just becoming too big to ignore. You have governments officially admitting that UAPs or UFOs are real, and then you have Göbekli Tepe.
A massive, sophisticated megalithic site in Turkey that's 12,000 years old.
It predates the flood. It predates Egypt, predates Sumer. It proves advanced civilization existed much, much earlier than we're told. The official timeline is shattered.
We've been focused this whole time on the lost technology, the flying machines, the free energy. But what if that was just a side effect? What if the real secret of Mu was something else entirely?
That's the ultimate reveal in these texts. The real secret wasn't the machines. It was consciousness.
What does that mean exactly?
The Naacal weren't just brilliant engineers. They were ascended masters. They understood that the universe is vibration, that consciousness creates reality, that we are all connected nodes in one universal mind.
And that was the real thing the keepers had to suppress.
Yes. The greatest act of the Great Hiding wasn't burying the machines. It was suppressing human potential. They taught us fear, separation, scarcity. Because a low vibration divided humanity is easy to control.
So where did they hide this ultimate knowledge? If it's so powerful, where is it?
Not in a vault, not buried under the ice. They hid it in the one place no one would ever think to look.
Inside us.
The Veritas Codex, the great archive of Mu, isn't a book, it's a biological code. It's the 98% of our DNA that our scientists have dismissed for decades as junk DNA.
It's a blueprint.
A blueprint for our full potential, waiting for the right frequency to be activated.
And the Maya knew this. The end of their calendar wasn't the end of the world.
It was the end of the sleep cycle, the beginning of the Great Awakening. A time, the sources say, that is right now.
So we're at a crossroads.
The choice. The keepers offer more of the same. Fear, control, dependence. But the code inside us is activating. We're starting to remember.
Mu isn't a place on a map we need to find.
It's a state of being we need to reclaim. The free energy isn't in a pyramid in Egypt. It's the potential within our own consciousness. The Veritas Codex is you.
So to wrap up this deep dive, we've gone through some monumental claims today. A global mother culture, Mu, destroyed in a cataclysm. Advanced technology based on free energy and sound. And a secret war fought for millennia to keep humanity in a state of forgetting.
For me, what really stands out is that the biggest tragedy of Mu's fall wasn't the loss of the cities or the machines. It was the loss of the understanding that consciousness itself is the ultimate technology. Everything we're searching for outside of ourselves is actually an inheritance waiting to be activated within our own selves.
The great forgetting is over. Welcome to the awakening. What frequency will you choose to explore next?